Welcome to the Drive Able podcast. I'm Ali Akbarian and over there is Brad Williams, and today we are talking about specialised motor driving instruction with Mark Fraser of Drive Smart Driving School in South Australia. Mark is a driving instructor that helps people with disabilities drive and get on the road, and in this episode we're going to talk all about everything about driving instruction, NDIS, discuss the funding process, and anything you need to know about getting on the road in the disability sector. Mark is very expert, a huge expert in this area and very knowledgeable. He's been doing this for more than 20 years and he's extremely passionate. You're going to find out from this interview, to say he's passionate is selling him short, really. So I'm really excited to have this chat with him. Are you, Brad?
Look, a shout out. I work with Mark to help people find the right solutions for them. So I know Mark. Had to get him on. We've been asking him for months and months and months to come on the Drive Able podcast because of his passion in the industry. The problem is he's so busy. So we're very thankful to have him on today and making the time available for us. So let's get this underway.
Let's do it. Thanks, Mark.
Welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where each episode you get to listen to two of Australia's leading professionals in the area of driving and community mobility for people with disabilities. In each episode, they interview drivers, carers, and industry experts and share the insider's guide to driving with a disability. Here are your hosts, Brad and Ollie.
Hi everyone, I'm really excited to get into today's interview, but before we get started, we just want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors who make this show possible, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT. This show takes a lot of time and money to put together, and we just want to say thanks to our sponsors for helping you bring this podcast today. And today we have Mark Fraser, who's a driving instructor, and we're talking to him about being a specialised motor driving instructor. G'day Mark, how are you today?
I'm good, going well.
We start with the same question for everybody. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what makes you a driving instructor? Where have you come from? How have you got to this point in your life?
So it's a bit of a journey. I guess background has always been automotive. It's always been tech. It's always been engineering. There was a motorsport background. And I actually wanted to get into being a driving instructor to teach motorsport. But while I was doing my MDI course, MDI means motor driving instructor, I recognised that the most use, the most help I could be is actually helping people every day driving on the road. So that's sort of in a nutshell.
And how long have you been doing it for?
23 years.
23, yep. And how have you got into the disability side of it all, Mark? When did that start? How did that come into it? And is that the main thing that you do now?
Yeah, is that the only thing?
I always have mainstream clients, in answer to you, sort of, Ali, there, that I always have some what I call mainstream clients. But originally, I think I've always helped people that found driving a bit more difficult, that were struggling with learning. It was going to take them longer. And so that was something that always came fairly easily to me. And then actually shifting into, I suppose, the more recognised, specialised sector with a vehicle modification like a spinner knob or something. I was contacted by a Paralympian, gold medal winning Paralympian, Ben Hall, back in about 2008. And he said he needed a spinner knob to drive. Could I help him? And my response was, well, to be honest, I actually have no idea, but I'll go buy a spinner knob and we'll work it out together. And so I guess that's how it started. And just the next client needed another piece of kit, and the next client needed something else, and it's just gone from there.
So do you modify your vehicle each time? Like, is your vehicle got multiple modifications, or do you have multiple vehicles?
Has multiple modifications. So I have a vehicle that specifically is mine with Drive Smart, And that one has just gradually, as each client needed something, added something new. So it can probably be driven about 10 or 15 different ways. Yeah. And they all bolt in and out so that the next client isn't cluttered by what another client might need. And then we have access to 2 other vehicles, which are highly equipped to helping people that need, modified vehicle controls.
Is it just driving lessons, or do you do assessments and things like that as well?
So I'm a CVTA examiner, which means I can do the final assessments for clients and actually issue a driver's license. So I can take a client from absolute learning through all their driving with their modified controls. Potentially for some, I do the whole 75 hours with them because they don't have their own vehicle with that equipment at that stage.
Yeah.
And then issue the license at the end.
That's really good. Because what I was thinking was, my initial thought is really good, but then maybe, I don't know. I guess what I'm thinking is, if you're used to a specific environment, particularly in these, scenarios with disability clients, then
Yep.
Suddenly having to do your test with somebody else in a different environment could completely throw you off in a different car. And we've been speaking so much about on this podcast about how, specific people need their specific setups. And then if you have to go into a different car to do your test, it's probably going to throw things off, right? So this is a really good option.
Yes, yeah, it's really important that someone can do that the whole way through. What that's going to look like in the future and what Department of Transport are going to do that is a little bit unknown at the moment. But for now, we can take someone on the whole journey all the way through to license and even beyond license if they need support once they get their car modified.
Now, if you're listening to this in another state of Australia, Mark's talking about South Australia. South Australia have 75 hours criteria for learner drivers. And we know that that's a bit different in New South Wales and Victoria as well. And the CBT&A is a competency-based training method. So that's some other states call it logbook. It's about ticking off little assessments along the way rather than one big assessment at the very end. Is that right, Mark? Have I summed it up fairly well?
Yeah, that's quite a good summary. Yes, and there's no big exam at the end. It's a whole pile of assessments along the way. There is a final assessment, but it's a more comprehensive process and very supportive of people in this sector.
Is that just to clarify for listeners and myself, because I'm from New South Wales, is it common in South Australia to have private people like yourself be authorized by the government to issue licenses, or whatever you call it?
Yeah, that is the only way we do it here. So the whole licensing process, whether it's an examiner who actually does driving tests, which everyone in other states would be familiar with, that's still a private operator who's authorized by the Department of Transport to deliver that.
Yeah, okay. So, for example, the difference in New South Wales is you would have a private person you do all your lessons with, but the last test, you have to go to a government office and sit in a government person's car, or have them sit in your car or a rental car or something like that. And the government person employee is sitting in the car with you doing the assessment. And so that's why I was saying, if you suddenly have to change that environment, if you're in New South Wales, it's going to be a lot harder than that system in South Australia. Sounds pretty inclusive, I guess.
We are blessed with that system here. Although, having said that, if someone is driving with a modified vehicle, a government officer either has to sit in on the final assessment or does their own separate assessment. So there's still a government overlooking of anyone who's what I call on the medical pathway. They're driving with a modified vehicle, or there's something different.
Yeah. So look, the take-home message is make sure you're doing it appropriately for your state. Make sure that you're understanding of what the requirements are in your state, and make sure that you look into those. But what we wanted to do, Mark, is talk to you about NDIS and how driving instruction fits into NDIS. How did you get involved with the NDIS side of things?
I think it was a bit of a default thing, really. Clients had funding and they, approached us, or they were existing clients that we're already working with, and then funding became available, and so sessions, they started to be funded by NDIS funding.
And how can I ask? How does it work with funding with respect to NDIS and lessons? Is there a limit? Is there a do they cap it? How does it work? Because, for example, the reason why I'm saying is, and this could be a comparison or not, in the transport world, it seems to be a lot easier for clients to get, like, let's say, a voucher for taxis from NDIS without really any approval process. And it seems to be like they can get a lot of them. Whereas to get like a car converted, they can get 20 grand worth of taxi conversions, taxi receipts, I guess, a lot easier than a 20 grand conversion. So is that the same in driving instruction? Like, can you just get as many as you want, or does it get funded as a package?
It's driving is quite complex within NDIS. As you're saying, something that's really definable, like a taxi voucher, or it's really easy, it's really definable, and you can go, oh, well, we're just going to issue 100 vouchers for this year or something. That seems to work easily. Driving is very difficult, I think, to manage, because there'll be some clients who learn easily, everything will work really well for them, they'll go through, and they might need 20, 30 hours of support. I have clients that I've been working with. I have one client that I've been working with for 5 years. He will get his license this year. He will be an amazing driver, but there's no way someone's going to fund something for 5 years, because they just wonder what's going on. So it is very, very difficult. The upshot is that a client who's looking for funding would seek, make sure it's in their plan, that gaining a license or returning to driving or whatever it is actually in their NDIS plan. They then have an OT assessment, and that's, as Brad's mentioned, sort of the OT side of things would go to someone like Brad. And
can I just quickly interrupt? Sorry. When you say make sure in your plan, I just want to clarify, does driving instruction or lessons automatically fall into a plan if you're getting if you are getting a modification done, or do you have to think about that separately and actually apply for that separately?
Great question.
You have to think about it separately.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's very important, I guess, because I would imagine you could go get it done, and if you don't think about that, then you got a car and you don't know how to drive it. No one's going to teach you how to drive it, right?
Very good point. Very good point, Ali. Yeah, I can build on that as well. Just going back to what Mark was saying, the OT assessment, according to the NDIS guidelines, quite often need to recommend driving instruction and how many driving instructor lessons.
Yeah, okay.
And then they need to go and get a quote from a driving instructor to get that added to the plan. Now, some people are able to work through the system and get lessons funded first, and then have an OT assessment along the way for modifications. But more often than not, the process is an OT assessment to figure out what's required in regards to modifications, and also a recommendation for driving instructor lessons. And then they would head to someone like Mark to get a quote, and then that quote is assessed to be put into their NDIS plan. What do you reckon, Mark? Have I summed that up fairly well?
I think that's pretty close. Something that people need to be aware of is that they may have had driving in their plan. They may have had funding allocated for driving. They may have had their OT assessment, but until the quote is actually approved, because driving is a quotable support, until that quote has been approved by NDIA, that funding is not accessible. And clients, quite understandably, struggle with this. They go, well, the funding's there. Why can't you use it? Why aren't we booking lessons? And it is there, but our quote still needs to be accepted. Yep. And once we get written authority that the quote is accepted, we can go ahead. And sometimes that's quite a long, drawn-out process.
That's very important for people to understand. That's why we got Mark onto this podcast. If you're looking to learn to drive, whether it's after an accident and you're trying to get a license reinstated again, or whether you're on a learner journey as a 16-year-old or older, this is really important to understand. So let's just summarize that again. This is a quotable service. You have to submit a quote to be approved by the NDIS, which is different to most other areas of the NDIS, where for OT, for example, we've got a capped rate and people can use their funding that they're provided at the start of their plan to pay for occupational therapy as they require it. For Mark, and being a specialized driving instructor, they can have money put aside in their capital, in their budget for capacity building. You can't use it for driving instruction until that's approved by the NDIA.
This is important to, I guess, note, because it's a bit of a weird quirk for NDIS, because generally the services aren't quoted the same way. Generally, it's products that are quoted like this, but this is one of the only services that I've heard of that you have to get quotes on. And that's what I think, like Mark was saying, makes it even harder, because you've got to, pull out of a genie's hat how many lessons this person's going to need, and services are so hard to define, like they've got all these other support services that they're uncapped, like you said, or they give a budget or whatever. Whereas this, you have to have quotes and so on. So it's very important you follow that due diligence, because you don't want to be stuck for 2 years with no lessons in a car that's converted.
Well, you don't want to be audited and have to reimburse the NDIA. That is something that is in the background that you need to be aware of. I haven't heard it happening, but you need to be aware that is the risk of this happening. So even if you're self-managed, you need to be aware of how that's being used. Yeah,
that's really good.
So Mark, you've got access to a bunch of cars that you said. Do you do just physical disabilities, or do you work in other areas as well?
So currently, and it's a good question to be asking now, Brad, is that in February we made a bit of a shift in focus for our business, for DriveSmart. And that shift in focus, just out of necessity, was mostly to support now people who have some sort of physical needs, as in they need a modified vehicle to drive, because there's a limited number of people in South Australia who have driving schools that have modifications at their disposal. We have been really blessed by our association with an organisation here, Paraquad, who saw a need in the community, and they put together their community driver training vehicle with a series of mods in it that they own it, we operate it. But that vehicle supports a lot of hospital clinics, which otherwise wouldn't have support. And because of Paraquad support, we can do that at a reasonable cost for the hospital clinic clients. And so they've come out of a hospital clinic, they need a driving assessment to return to driving, perhaps some lessons, and it enables us to support that. We also have, we're the operators in South Australia of the Total Ability high-level training and assessment vehicles. Total Ability is a provider and supplier and distributor of modified vehicle controls, and they've created these vehicles. There's 5 of them in Australia. We share ours with Tasmania, and it enables people to drive from wheelchair, it enables people to drive by joystick, and enables voice command for indicators, wipers, washers, all those sort of things. And so we support that, we operate that when it's here. And that's a very dynamic shift for people who, if they can drive a wheelchair, they can drive that, as long as they've got the visual and other requirements.
Yeah. And that's really important. We want to touch on that as well. And Mark, it's a great service that the Total Ability team provide with their vehicles that come around and help people get a feel for these high-level controls, assess what they need, and so forth as well. And you can go back and listen to an interview that we've done in the past with Total Ability. And you can also listen to, there's a couple of interviews that we've done now in the past where we've spoken to people that have been through this process as well. So if you just go into the podcast channel and put in high level or Total Ability, and it'll come up with those interviews that we've done in the past. And they're a great listen, and they really unpack the process that Mark's spoken about. But Mark, people go through an assessment first, and then can they use these vehicles, the high level vehicle, to do their training in as well?
Yeah, and in particular, because the structure is, if someone's being funded, no one's going to spend $200,000 on a vehicle, plus more than that maybe, if someone hasn't proven they can drive, if they haven't successfully gone through the process, if they don't have a license yet. And no matter who the funding body is, even as a privately funded operation, you don't go and do major modifications in the hope someone might get a license. And I get it. And these Total Ability vehicles have made it possible for a client to, prove they can drive, show that they're capable, and then go through to licensing, show a government officer, whether it's South Australia or any other state, there's still a government officer involved at that level, that they can have a license and come out with their license. And then, with absolute confidence, knowing they're going to be drivers, then seek the funding for the modifications and have that vehicle built for them.
Yeah, quite often as an occupational therapist, knowing when to do these elements are really important. And it is different for everybody. Some people do try to get funding through the learning process as they're going. And some people do it right at the very end once they've got their license. But as we've discussed, Ali, in the past, then it sometimes can be a 2-year process.
Yeah, that's what I was actually
process for modifications.
It is, by the time you get everything through, you're looking at a couple of years. So, it sounds like a long time, but it is what it is. And by the time you start it, before you know it, you'll be done anyway. But yeah, it's just one of those things. There's a lot of steps to that process.
Talking about those little steps, Mark, do you think NDIS has made a positive difference to this industry?
I think there are people driving now that would not be driving if NDIS didn't exist.
Yeah.
I think that's in a nutshell. It's quite a few of the clients that I would work with across the sector. Oftentimes, because they're where they're at, they don't have access to funding. They can't get out and get jobs. They can't go and work to earn money. And so by NDIS stepping in and going, okay, we can provide the funding for the lessons, we can get the vehicle modified or even partly contribute to that. That then lets that person be in a position to be much more active in the community. They can pursue work roles that, I've got one client who he actually does the rural and regional stuff for his workplace from his wheelchair in a van, and he gets out there and he goes and does it, which he couldn't do before.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, isn't it? So they want to know that you're going to use your license, but you need your license to be able to go and do stuff. What comes first? Is it the license first, or is it a job first? And quite often it is license first, so you can actually get a job, so you can actually get out of the house, so you can actually get out in the community. And it's much harder, as we've found in multiple interviews, to be able to do that with access cabs or with community transport, with trains and things like that. I mean, Ali, you're in Sydney. The train network in Sydney is significantly different to that in Adelaide.
It's
So
funny. Everybody always says how great it is here, but everyone in Sydney thinks it sucks. So it's really funny when we hear people say that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, it's fine as long as you live near a train line.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. Where to in the future, Mark? What should we consider for the future, and where do you think this is going to go leading forward from here?
You mean from an industry perspective
Yeah,
and the whole specialized sector?
yeah. Yep.
Technology continues to improve. Like 6 years ago, we didn't have joystick steering capacity, simply because electronic braking wasn't recognized in motor vehicles until quite recently. And now there's production vehicles that have electronic brakes. It's so the sky's the limit in lots of respects. However, dare I say it, the sort of Google Drive vehicles and all those sort of things, self-drive vehicles. I think if I was in this sector, I'd be one of the first people putting my hand up to go, get me a vehicle. I'll sign up for one of them that's going to drive me somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get in my wheelchair and it'll lock me down and I can, read my book and let the vehicle drive me somewhere. That's going to be, I guess has to be real. We need to recognize that would be a great step for some people.
I think we'll see that, just for the listeners, just from someone who's very involved in the automotive industry. I think our grandkids will be actually operating that way. We won't be. We'll see some of those cars, and they are going to be out in the next 5 years, but they will only be in very, very small, limited areas that have the infrastructure. A futuristic robotic future is probably 50 years away, to be honest.
At the moment, we still need to be able to park it in our garage. We still need to be able to get it in and out. We need to be able to drive around our local environment. And then at the moment, we can put it into, with some cars, autopilot on a highway. But like you said, especially in Australia, Ali, the infrastructure needs to change quite a lot.
Yeah, and even in other parts of the world, there's a lot of talk about it in this autonomous space, and particularly in the automotive. I guess it's a little bit of a thing because I found that some people and companies feel like there's no point in innovating because of this. And that's really a waste. That's not the right way to think about it, because autonomous vehicles, they're just going to be, even in places like high-end places like, Germany and all that, they're just going to be in the small parts of the capital cities. Nobody has that kind of infrastructure to run those vehicles. It's not what people think they are. The best you're going to have is semi-autonomous, where people are going to be getting assistance, and that's going to get really, really good. But you're always going to need to be sitting behind that wheel for, I reckon, at least another 3 to 5 decades. So I would encourage people to still keep investing in these kind of vehicles, and this technology is not really going to go anywhere anytime soon. Yes, there will be other options, but this idea, because I know there's this kind of romantic idea of these futuristic vehicles where, like you said, people can just rock up and, go in their wheelchair and sit in there and it'll take them somewhere. I hate to advise you, anyone listening to this is probably never going to see anything like that in their lifetimes. So yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's fair comment, Ali, and it's a bit of a dream in some of my clients that, they go, oh, wouldn't this be easier if I could? But I think technology keeps getting better, and the capacity for the wheelchairs and what's the functions that someone can operate from a wheelchair continue to improve. People continue to innovate, and something we're looking at with one of our clients would be, and it's something we need to sort of work through, is that as the wheelchair docks with the vehicle, and when I say docks, locks into the floor. People may or may not know what docking station means, but it's like a massive seatbelt buckle that actually locks the chair down to the floor of the vehicle. And looking at potentially like electrical docking as well. So then switches and things that are on the arm of the chair can then start to operate some functions in the vehicle, and we just keep innovating. and with people like Total Ability and yourselves, Ali, there's just constantly finding solutions, and so that's exciting. That's really exciting. My background's technical. I love the technical side of all this, and if something doesn't quite work for a client, oh well, let's build a bracket, let's make this happen, let's do that, even to prove a concept. It's exciting.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see also. I just had a thought of the very first interview we did with Qua, and he had kind of like a bionic leg, and I wonder if we'll see more of things like that to help with driving, because like when we saw, I showed when we went to RiaCare in Europe, there's so much more of a rise of things like exoskeletons, and those things will provide you with a little bit more function than to be able to operate the car with less controls, or less assisted controls. So I think you might see a bit of that coming out.
Yeah, and who knows? Like, the technology will just continue to innovate and change as we go forward. We hope that people don't get lazy because of autonomous cars and put all their focus into that, because between now and then, as we've said, we've got a lot of people that need these bits of technology to help get them to drive. And Mark, I just want to put it out there. I've worked with you now for a few years, and I just want to say that Mark he's an innovator as well. Like he said, he put in a bracket, put in something to try and make it work. So it takes people like yourself in the industry as well that are just keen to try and find solutions wherever possible. And I want to thank you for coming on to today's podcast and sharing your story with us, but also what you do for the industry as well. I think it's fantastic, and we need more people like you that are willing to step up and really assist people to do this. There's a shortage of driving instructors and equipment available for people. There's wait lists. Like Mark said, he's had to refine the services that he's doing to be able to help people, to be able to refine it to be able to have a manageable workload. And that's the same across the industry right now. So if there's driving instructors out there that really want to make a difference to someone's life and really, get that heart value for money for what you're doing, this is an industry that's calling for more people to jump into it.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Mark.
Mark, hang on. Before we go, we can't let anybody get away without this final question. But before we do, we just want to give another shout out to our sponsors that make this show possible and bring you Mark today, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT. Mark, we've learned over this podcast that cars are more than just getting from A to B, and we've highlighted that today as well. But what's something that's really meaningful for you? What's a journey that you've been on, or something that you've used a car for that's more than just going from here to there?
It's an interesting thing. I saw this question, and thanks for the list, guys. A bit of a heads up, and I sort of was trying to come up with something, and I think something that it's not quite a journey for me, but it's just a recognition of where I've sort of come from and my connection to vehicles and growing up in the country and on a farm, is that, my friend had a 12th birthday, and the entire entertainment for that party was all the guests, the young boys, from 10 through to about, 13 or something, all being taught by the 14-year-old older brother how to drive the ute, with all the rest of us in the back. And shouting encouragement, and of course manual ute, old thing, stalling and whatever else. So, I think that's a memory for around cars that for me is, just that was the entertainment that was normal and expected in a country sort of upbringing. And then there's been other things like overnight runs with mates to Bathurst to go watch the racing, and then the overnight run back, and you look back on it and go, wow, that was pretty crazy. But they're still sort of memories of heading to Bathurst with a whole bunch of other people that are all going the same way, and that's sort of probably something that sticks in mind about cars for me, and you know, the V8s and the bits and pieces from my background. So yeah, that's cool.
Having just recently been to a supercars race, those V8s, they you can't forget them. I tell you, they're loud and they are fast. Like once they come out, you're just like, whoa, they're something else. So,
they're pretty special. Yeah, it's all good.
So Mark, just to round it off, we want to say a massive thank you to you once again for coming on the podcast and sharing the NDIS side of things when it comes to vehicle modifications and learning how to use those. We stick around, folks, because what we're going to do, Ali and I are going to do our top 3 takeaways. We've got a few important ones that we're going to go over from this interview with Mark. Mark, absolutely great to have you on. If there's any questions, can they find you on the socials or anything else like that at all? Is there any way, or can we share a contact through our page here? Is there a way that they can get in contact to ask any more questions?
Contact is fine, and you know, our website is, you know, drivesmartdrivingschool.com.au. Information there and bits and pieces and contacts there. And happy to help. And you mentioned before, Brad, about instructors seeking to, maybe wondering if they want to join the sector. Really happy to get alongside anyone that wants to do that. And you know, I've spoken about it at association meetings and things with a view to encouraging not just clients to sort of, you know, seek information, but instructors as well, because it's a huge need and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to do.
Yeah.
Great way to finish it off. Thank you very much, Mark. Absolutely amazing interview. So many gold nuggets in there that Ali and I are going to try to unpack our top 3 from that. So stick around, everybody. But as we go off to this little break, thank you again, Mark.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, welcome back. In this section, we bring you our expert analysis and top 3 takeaways from the interview. This is where we provide our more than 30 years of joint experience in the industry, helping people with disabilities to drive and get out of the community in a safe and meaningful way. So yeah, Brad, that was a great interview with Mark. I thought that was really, really good and informative, and clearly a very passionate guy. So that's awesome having someone like that in our industry. What are our top 3 takeaways?
Yeah, that's why I had to get him on. He is an absolute passionate person about this industry. Fantastic driving instructor. We know that there's lots out there, but the first thing that we want to touch on is, he made a very good point of it. You've got to get the order right. We've got to get the order of how this works right. And that's why we wanted to get Mark on for this interview, so he could give the driving instructor's point of view. And now what I can do is I can help people understand how it fits with the occupational therapy point of view as well. We touched on it in the interview, but let's unpack it a little bit more. The NDIS guidelines for driving say that you've got to have an OT assessment to recommend the lessons and how many lessons. And then you go off and get a quote from a driving school like Mark and Drive Smart Driving School, or whatever the driving school is in your area that has the controls or has the needs that you require. That usually comes from a recommendation from an occupational therapist. If those 2 things align, that needs to be submitted to the NDIS, and then approval is granted for that money, for that quoted service. And it's a bit like modifications, as we touched on. So if anyone's watching this on YouTube, Ali's got a picture behind his head of a chair topper on top of a car. To get that chair topper put on top of a car, you need to send in a quote with an OT report to go with it. It's the same for driving lessons with a driving school. Okay. Now, that needs to be approved by the NDIS. It's not a given.
Yeah.
And then you can start driving lessons.
And the order of it is important. It's got to be approved before or at the same time as the modifications, because if you don't have that approval, then you're not going to have that there. And that's kind of the segue into that second lesson, which is really to highlight that the driving lessons are a separate item to modifications. they do need to be quoted and approved. Their quote needs to be approved separately. And this is something that we really want to highlight because it's a bit of a unique quirk in the NDIS because typically speaking, services in NDIS are not quoted. They're kind of budgeted and you know, so on and so forth. It's a bit different. But when it comes to driving instruction, I don't know if it's on purpose. I don't know if it's just something that's fallen through the cracks, but it is what it is. You do have to take that extra step and make sure that you have the allocated budget from a quote, and that quote is, you know, approved and so on. So you do need to do a little bit of, you know, looking into a crystal ball and working with the OT and taking a bit of experience and guesswork into figuring out what you need, but that's what you're going to have to do. And it's very important you don't miss that.
There's a couple of things that didn't come up in the interview that I just want to highlight in regards to that. There are very few registered NDIS service providers as driving instructor schools. Very few. In fact, in South Australia, there is one or two only. So trying to get agency managed funding for driving lessons, it just limits your ability to use a driving school. Please take away from this that try to get your funding approved as plan managed or self-managed for this section. Talk to your local area coordinator, talk to your funding people for your NDIS plan to try and get this allocated as plan managed or self-managed and not agency managed, because there is hardly any registered providers as driving schools. Really important point if you're going through this, no matter where you are. Now, I can't talk about Sydney. I can't talk about Melbourne. I can't talk about Brisbane itself, those real high population areas. But I can talk to you about rural. I can talk to you about most other places. Adelaide's a small country town, really. There's no registered providers. They need to mix and match with general population. They're not going to go through the whole registration process. So make sure it gets released as community or self-managed or plan managed. Really big, important point for that. Yeah. The other thing about that first point is when do you actually get your modifications? And we spoke about it. It's a little bit of a chicken or egg scenario. When do you match your modifications with your lessons? And some people, like Mark said, do all of their hours first to prove that they can drive, and then they start the modifications process application to try and get a car and get the money for the modifications for their car.
Yeah.
Other people, it's a little bit more known, a bit more concrete. You definitely know that they're going to be able to get their license. You know, there's no other things that you need to problem solve or process or anything else like that. It's a pretty much a given that if you follow this course of lessons that you're going to get your license, then you can apply for the modifications to start in the early stages. Other people, because of availability of vehicles, they need to get the vehicle first. And we spoke about that in Trent with our last interview, a couple of interviews back. He went through the process of getting his car modified first after doing actually a test with Mark and Drive Smart driving school and the total ability van. Did the test in that car, then got the car funded, and then did lessons in his own car. So it can change. It's up to the individual and what the individual needs are for that one.
Yeah.
But it kind of leads into our third point, doesn't it?
Yeah. And well, the one thing I was going to say is, as someone from Sydney and someone who has a company that distributes product all around the country, the need for driving instructors in this space is it's huge. It's underserviced everywhere by a huge amount. There's queues everywhere, and also not enough vehicles. And that is the third lesson, which Mark mentioned an idea about working with an organization, Paraquad, and creating like a community disability training vehicle. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. I know of lots of communities that would bind together to work and build a car, buy a car. We've, as Mobility Engineering, a little shameless plug, have put ourselves out there and said we'd help companies if they want to work together with the community. That's what we love doing, bringing communities together. to get a car on the ground, off the ground. We're happy to provide products and support around that because it's great. Like this is a great solution to something which is a huge expense for a company to outlay. Let's say if you're a driving school and you want to set up one of these cars, well, you're probably going to have to spend 80 to 100 grand to set one up. And when are you going to get that money back? So as a business, it's quite hard to justify that. Like we said, it's a great business to get into to feel good, but feeling good doesn't pay their business bills. And so that's the reality. And so that's what the business people are thinking. And so this is a great option. If you can reach out to your community and get people together to get a car, then you're going to find so many more ability, like driving instructors and people that are going to be basically able to use this vehicle. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Look, and there's such a need out there with the growing of the NDIS. More people are exploring. This is why we do this podcast. There's more people exploring what's available for them. It's something which will continue to grow for quite a bit of time, we believe. And that's why we're doing this, to try and educate people about what the process is, what's involved, but also to excite people that they don't need to be at home relying on other people. You can be independent with a motor vehicle more often than what you think you can. So get out there and explore what's available, but also from a driving instructor point of view, we need more people to explore that area as well. It's very interesting. Well, there's one point that we didn't touch on with Mark, and I kind of wish we did, but I just want to highlight it now. What makes a specialized motor driving instructor? Because in the NDIS guidelines, it says specialized motor driving instructor. Technically, there's no such thing from my point of view. There is nothing in Australia that makes you specialized. Now, I'm doing quotes, air quotes around the word specialized if you're listening to this and not watching us on YouTube. There's no actual qualification that's required for the NDIS to be specialized. It's a term for not just having driving lessons like a 16-year-old. There's something unique about the driving lessons to help you with the disability. Okay, so whether it's more time for someone with a learning difficulty, autism, something like that, more specific teaching strategies to try and someone to organize their thoughts, to organize the chaos that's on the roads, or whether it's using modifications as well. There's something unique about the learning process. There's actually nothing to actually make somebody specialized. There's no qualifications or anything else like that to make someone specialized. So I just wanted to touch on that the word specialized is it's not a throwaway term. That's not going to come across right, but there's actually nothing to make someone specialized. So make sure that
there's no formal process.
No formal process.
Yeah.
You don't need to be registered. You don't need to prove that you've got a qualification. You do need to show that you're a driving instructor. If you're going to take money from somebody to teach them how to drive, you need to be qualified as a driving instructor, but there's no qualification for being specialized. So just make sure that you are finding somebody that's right for you, and take the advice of the OT as well, because they work with driving instructors a lot. And form teams to be able to get the best outcomes for clients.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think we will wind it up on that point. And we want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT, for helping us bring you the interview with Mark today. Williams OT Driver Assessment and Rehab offers all the pieces of the puzzle to assist people with disabilities reach their driving and community mobility goals. Mobility Engineering is a team of passionate and dedicated people focused on bringing Australia's largest range of suitable transport solutions for all walks of life. As we say in every episode, the advice provided in this podcast is general in nature. So if you have any queries about what you can do and what will work for you, get in contact with your local OT or mobility dealer and set yourself up with a trial. Trials really do put you into that driver's seat.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to be doing with these driving instructors as well. It's exactly the same thing. You're going to be trialing the driving instructor as well when you do your assessment with the OT. You'll be trialing modifications. You'll be trialing the driving instructor as well. So make sure you do those trials. Make sure that you set yourself up with those trials, and get out there on the road. That's it for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
See you in the next one.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Ali Akbarian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate, and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.